$4 billion. That is what the United States had spent on aerial surveillance infrastructure over Afghanistan by the spring of 2002. Predator drones flying 24-hour orbits, global Hawk high-altitude reconnaissance platforms capable of imaging an entire province in a single pass, Rivet Joint Signals Intelligence aircraft intercepting every radio transmission and satellite phone call within 200 miles of the Pakistan border. The most sophisticated intelligence collection apparatus ever deployed in a combat zone, and they could not find one man. Night after night, the drones circled above the Afghan desert, their cameras staring down at silent compounds, empty roads, and villages that looked frozen in the dust. His name was Mullah Omar, former leader of the Taliban, the individual directly responsible for providing sanctuary to al-Qaeda before September 11th. He had been on the run since December 2001 when Kandahar fell, and he vanished into the mountains along the Afghan-Pakistani frontier. Despite overhead coverage so comprehensive that American analysts could track individual vehicles moving through the Hindu Kush in real time, Omar remained invisible. A senior CIA officer stationed at Bagram Air Base later described the frustration simply. "We had the technology to count the buttons on a man's jacket from 60,000 feet, but we could not tell you which compound he was sleeping in tonight." Into this operational dead end arrived a force that numbered fewer than 30 operators at peak deployment. Drawn from the 22nd Special Air Service Regiment and the Special Boat Service, they had no dedicated drone assets, no satellite tasking authority, no multi-billion-dollar signals intelligence network. What they had was something the Pentagon's technology could not replicate: human intelligence. They moved through a village in the dead of night, boots quiet in the dust, a single dim light glowing behind a wooden door, to knock once and know they had come to the right house. They could, at 3 a.m., knock on the correct door and extract the one individual who knew where the target had been 12 hours earlier. Within 6 weeks of their deployment into Helmand and Kandahar provinces, British Special Forces had generated more actionable intelligence on senior Taliban leadership than the entire American unmanned aerial vehicle fleet had produced in the previous 4 months. The Americans noticed. What they noticed wasn't just the intelligence, it was the methodology. British operators were conducting human intelligence collection in environments that American doctrine had written off as too hostile for sustained ground-based work. The southern Afghan provinces in 2002 were considered black holes. Coalition forces controlled the major roads during daylight, and everything else belonged to the insurgents. After sunset, the roads emptied. The wind pushed fine desert dust across abandoned checkpoints. Entire villages fell silent except for the low hum of generators somewhere in the darkness. The British were moving through those black holes as though they were permissive territory. Small teams, sometimes as few as 4 operators, inserting on foot into villages that had not seen Western forces since the Soviet withdrawal in 1989. 4 shadows moving down from the dark hills, faces wrapped against the dust, boots leaving shallow prints in the sand outside sleeping compounds. They were not conducting raids, they were conducting conversations. A former SBS operator described the approach with deliberate understatement. "The Americans were very good at watching from above. We were trained to operate from within. Different skill set, different training, different result." The training he referenced had been refined across 30 years of operations in Northern Ireland, where moving undetected through hostile populations and developing human sources had been the difference between life and death. It stretched back further to the Dhofar insurgency in Oman in the 1970s. There, SAS 4-man patrols spent months embedded with local tribes, learning languages, building relationships, and eventually dismantling a Soviet-backed insurgency from within. These were not skills you could replicate with a training manual. They were accumulated through operational experience that no procurement budget could shortcut. By May 2002, British operators were producing intelligence packages that included not just grid coordinates but pattern-of-life assessments, tribal affiliation data, and historical context, which allowed targeting cells to distinguish between genuine Taliban leadership and local warlords playing both sides. No drone could provide that, regardless of sensor sophistication. The Pentagon's response was revealing. A planning assessment circulated through CENTCOM and JSOC recommended against expanding the British ground presence. The British lacked force protection infrastructure. Their footprint was too small to sustain casualties. Their equipment was considered outdated. Their methodology, described in one document as low-visibility indigenous engagement, was viewed as too slow for the required operational tempo. Translation: they are doing it wrong, do not rely on them. The warning was noted, and then systematically ignored. British Command expanded Task Force Jacana and continued operations that were producing results the Americans could not match. In August 2002, a 4-man SAS patrol moved through Helmand Province under a moonless sky, following a source across dry irrigation canals and empty fields. Within hours, they identified the location of a senior Taliban commander coordinating attacks along Highway 1. The intelligence came from a source developed over 2 weeks, a village elder whose nephew had been killed by the Taliban for refusing to provide fighters. The information was passed to a joint targeting cell. Within 18 hours, the target was captured in a raid conducted by American Delta Force operators, supported by British surveillance assets. His interrogation produced intelligence that disrupted an improvised explosive device network responsible for approximately 40% of coalition casualties in Helmand during the preceding 3 months. An American Special Operations officer who reviewed the operation later told a British liaison, "Your 4 guys with no drones just did what our entire ISR architecture couldn't do in 4 months." By late 2003, the Americans had stopped questioning the British methodology and started trying to replicate it. Delta Force and SEAL Team 6 began incorporating low-visibility techniques into their training cycles. Human intelligence collection was elevated from a supporting capability to a primary mission set. The entire special operations community began to recalibrate its understanding of what intelligence superiority actually meant. It didn't mean having the most sensors. It meant having operators who could walk into a room full of people who wanted them dead and walk out with the information that mattered. The most important sensor on any battlefield is the human operator who can distinguish between a Taliban commander and his cousin, between a weapons cache and a farmer's tools, between actionable intelligence and noise. A drone can see everything. It understands nothing. The British operators in Afghanistan understood that the most valuable intelligence does not come from watching compounds from 20,000 feet. It comes from sitting with a village elder over 3 cups of tea and 2 hours of conversation that never once mentions the Taliban directly. It comes from sitting cross-legged on a worn rug with a village elder, 3 cups of hot tea slowly cooling between them, while the conversation drifts through family, crops, and weather before the real information finally surfaces. That capability is not built with procurement budgets or satellite constellations. It is built through selection systems that identify individuals capable of operating alone in any environment, training that teaches patience and cultural awareness alongside marksmanship and demolitions, and decades of experience that teach what no manual can convey. How to read a room, identify the one person who will talk, and extract information without asking a single direct question. $4 billion in drones could not find Mullah Omar. 30 British operators developed the human intelligence networks that tracked senior Taliban leadership across 3 provinces. The Pentagon warned that their methodology was too slow, too risky, and too dependent on variables it could not control. The results said otherwise. When American Special Operations began adopting those same techniques years later, nobody mentioned the warning anymore. They just called it lessons learned.